morning to you all. Laurence, Maryna, Jacques, and Dennis online. Can you hear us loud and clear? Can we see you?
Hi, Chris.
Hi there. Wonderful. The technology works. Good. So we have the topic this morning, ladies and gentlemen, on employee transformation experience. And I am delighted to have so many experienced voices around the table. We do have a set of questions that we discussed and some of your perspectives a couple of weeks ago, in fact, probably only a week ago. In a hybrid model as well, if I remember correctly. So a very short introduction. So on my right, we have Lawrence, who I was told I could pronounce it as Lawrence of Arabia. So I have that association with you now. Global Change Management Practice Leader, Royal Philips. Very warm welcome to you. Maryna Rusthoven, Program Director, Joint Degree MSc, Global Sustainable Business Development at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. That was quite a mouthful, wasn't it, Maryna? Yeah. Thank you. Jacques, to my left over here, Change Director, Vattenfall. I'm not sure whether that's a good Danish pronunciation. Corporate Communications, come here to tell his story. And last but certainly not least, Dennis online, very warm welcome to you. Dennis Martin Tolley Olsson, Group Sustainability Change Lead, Danske Bank.
Well done, Chris.
Thank you. I know there's a slight delay, isn't there? A couple of seconds on the online. So if I may, let me start with Laurence. So over here to my first question, very, very high-level question. Employee transformation experience. Why is this such an important topic in your mind, Laurence?
Well, thanks, Chris. I think we've just heard a perfect example of why it is such an important topic, right? So if we don't take the employee experience into account in a transformation, the risk is that a transformation will fail, right? Ultimately, we're aiming for adoption by employees of new ways of working. Only then we're going to get to a result. And when we don't take the reality of employees into account, so for instance, in the case of Philips, the reality is that we have 15 large transformation initiatives across the world. If we only sort of approach employees having our own single transformation in mind, it's not going to work. It's not going to work because it will feel like there are 15 different waves coming over them. And although individually all those 15 transformations might make sense in itself, we will only confuse people and it will lead to change fatigue and not an adoption of new ways of working.
Is there anything, Laurence, that particularly resonated with you, given the topic we just heard from the AXA Bank and Kirsten previously around the topic of transformation experience?
Well, I think giving ownership to the actual people that need to change, right? It's not just knowing what's best for them and demanding that, but giving them freedom to act. I think that's very important. And look at it from their own perspective. So you need to involve them in the change.
Yeah, very good. Jacques, your view on that same topic?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe we can make it a really short discussion. And by the way, Vattenfall and indeed change director. I've been change director. I'm now currently in another role. I could call myself a transition facilitator. So many things are ongoing in the company that it keeps on changing and new opportunities pop up. But when it comes to change, I mean, whatever kind of change that we are talking about, if it's positive or negative or challenging, or that we can solve it by just spending more money or whatever. I mean, in the end, every change is about people and emotions. Yeah. That's the only thing that it's about. And that's what we need to have in mind. And that's why we call it employee experience, or whatever stakeholder we are talking about, if not the employee. It's always about people and emotions.
Yeah. Nice, thank you, Jacques. Maryna, maybe a question for you. Upskilling and reskilling is critical. I know this is something close to your heart. Can you give us some of your insights on that?
Yeah, well, something that the pandemic showed us that we, I guess, realized that we were missing some skills of coping with stress, ability to, keep common sense intact when emotions are playing the part, because even the most educated, the most rational people lost their cool, if you will. pandemic is one of the examples. Now the crisis in Ukraine is another example. So ability to actually cope with these stressful situations related to emotions is a big thing. And or something we've seen is that people are lacking those stress coping skills. That's number one. Another thing when it comes to upskilling is ability to learn, or lifelong learning. And well, I guess I sound like a priest now, because this is what I do. You know, I'm an educator, and I'm very happy to hear that non-educator practitioners, they say that this is something, or the most important thing is to know how to learn. And this is something that in the corporate context, people never have time for. We're all so busy, you know, business as usual. We are, you know, our agendas are so full. And this is something that HR managers, learning and development managers are struggling with, because it's not the priority. You know, it's something that you think that the HR is pushing you to do, something that your line manager wants you to do, but it's never something that's your priority, because you're managing so many other things. So I think something that organizations should actually pay more focus to is upskilling their staff. And one of those things is learning how to learn, because a lot of us don't even know how to. A lot of us are missing that self-reflection of what is my skills gap, how do I go from there, how do I go back to this hybrid way of working, because things are different now. I think we need to take the time to reflect, okay, so what is my gap, how do I close this, how do I get my line manager, HR, to support me in that journey, and to make time for it. So that's number one.
This is can I just probe a little bit? So learn how to learn. Mm-hmm. So if I'm working in an organization and I come to you and say, help me learn how to learn, help me teach my people to learn how to learn, what would be your response to that?
Well, the number one thing that people think that learning is about just throwing a training to a team, and then after 1 hour of ADKAR model, they'll come out and they'll be happy, okay, and everything is going to be great. No, informal learning is actually where that happens. It's those one-on-one conversations. It's people actively looking for those inspiring mentors within the organization that they can listen to, that they can reflect and spar with. And that would be number one thing, the most practical and actually free thing that you can do. And this is why a lot of companies have these buddy system. They have this mentor, even informal ways of reaching out to somebody more senior who can give you a tip or two because they've been there longer and so on. And again, that doesn't cost a lot to the organization, because at the end of the day, it's all about budget, it's all about cost. So that would be my first approach that we all can do. However, that also requires a proactive approach from an employee to actually go and do that. Mm. So even if the organization is not facilitating those official mentor programs, how do I go and find somebody who I can listen to, who can help me make the next choice? So let's say if I'm making a transition, so after pandemic, you know that 40% of people are changing jobs. What are my next steps? Have I reached the ceiling in my current role and so on? So who will be the person to spar with about this? Because line manager probably will not be the first person you will go to. Yep. Because of the role you're in.
Yeah, because of the connection already in terms of their role and performance and those sort of things. Yeah. Okay, no, very good. Thank you very much. Dennis, may I come to you with my next question? Integration and execution have been integral to the Danske Bank. And how have you kept this focus? Dennis, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Well, change integration is a key execution lever for me in most of my sort of recent transformation projects, and something that I put an increased focus on. So for me, it's about two things. It's about decreasing end user complexity and increasing end user impact, you can say. Because quite often when we are in charge of a transformational project, we have a governance set up with a steering committee, a sponsor, a budget, project scope, time frame for key milestones, identified end users. And there's a tendency with very quickly going into execution mode, because we need to reach the milestones agreed within the time frame that we have committed to. And that's all good if our project is unique in the sense that no other transformational project supports the same product, the same core story, narrative, or similar. However, I mean, I would argue that that's rarely the case, even though that I think most of us would like to think that our project is a game changer with business impact never experienced before, right? So we are discovering uncharted territory. But when I was tasked for my sponsor in my current role to mature awareness and knowledge about sustainability or about our sustainability strategy across Danske Bank, I was initially given free hands to create new platforms, new measurement tools, and so on. Also because at that point in time, there wasn't much existing to leverage from. However, I decided to sort of start, exploring the other transformational programs already existing and that was in the pipeline to understand their intentional impact, their end users, their scope, their key milestones, etc. And after some, detective work, I identified that there was in the making a new purpose and culture program, and they were considering alluding to sustainability in their project scope. So quite quickly, I sort of informed my sponsor saying, listen, there are great synergies. There could be potential great synergies we didn't know at that point in time with this purpose and culture project. So I think we should integrate our initiatives and co-create together with them. The risk of not doing it was that end user complexity about sustainability would increase because the purpose and culture project would build their core story narrative about sustainability in one way, and we will build it in a different way. And for the end users, they will get confused about which narrative was the right one for good reasons. Now, the downside to this integration approach is, of course, that you're not fully in charge of timelines and milestones. And that's a key element to get, buy-in from your sponsor on. And also that you need to convince the other project team about co-creating initiatives, because that will also slow down the pace of their execution. So it's not an easy task. However, we managed to, succeed with this. And now the entire organization across Danske Bank, when thinking about sustainability, relates this to our sustainability strategy in connection with our company purpose. So from an employee experience point of view, these two things have now been merged together to be part of the same sort of cohesive employee experience. And we have integrated our measurement KPIs into sort of the culture engagement survey that was part of the culture and purpose project and so forth. So I say that the end user impact is much greater than if I have run my project isolated and built my own platforms and my own measurement tools. I might have delivered quicker, but with less impact. So that's what integration is for me.
Thank you, Dennis. Jacques, I can hear you reacting to that. Go ahead.
Can I?
Yes, you can. Go for it.
Well, I think it was interesting what you said, Dennis, about which narrative to follow.
Not sure which camera to look at.
Exactly. Well, over there, you're there.
I see you, Jacques.
Exactly. But which narrative to follow? And I think, isn't that just that you need one narrative? No matter how big your company is, no matter how much of change is ongoing, there's only one narrative. And I think I don't know if that's the case in your situation as well, Dennis, but if you cannot find one narrative, if you have to compete with other narratives, you're not going to succeed as a whole.
Yeah, and when you say narrative, Jacques, you mean like the storyline, right? The overall purpose.
And I mean, there's so many discussions already now online the last few years. It's all about the why. Why are we here? Why do we exist? And that's the core of your reasoning. A lot of companies also talk about purpose as well at Vattenfall.
It's the same for Vattenfall as well, isn't it?
Exactly, but then I think it's really interesting to see. So everybody talks about it nowadays, but how do you really succeed with it? And then, of course, this part of employee
transformation
is part of it.
Yeah.
Can I add to that?
Yes, please. Yes.
Only if you agree.
I do not agree.
Oh, wow.
Aha. We have some disagreement.
Well, not really a disagreement, but I would like to challenge you on
Please
this.
do,
So if the company, I understand the company has one narrative, then that's great. What if, from the bottom up, there is a different why? That should be okay. Why people do things, just basic marketing or psychology concepts, people have different motives why they do something.
Absolutely. Yeah.
At the end of the day, your goal is that people behave in the way you need them to behave. The why, on one hand, can be important, but it's not the only why what would make that successful. So I think something that maybe we don't pay enough attention to is when people have a different why, as long as they look the right direction with us, it should be okay. There should be the space for people to choose it for their own career growth, the other motives, they like their team or so on. I think we should allow for that.
Yeah, I think the two live in harmony, don't they, Maryna? I mean, you can have an overall business corporation narrative and storyline and purpose, but at the end of the day, the leitmotif, the driver, the individual motivation at an individual level, it's still there, isn't it? It doesn't go away, and it's still part of it somehow, but it's maybe more personal and more individual. Right. Okay. Jacques, I noticed Maryna mentioned the sort of bottom-up, top-down principle. So back to you. Tell us about Vattenfall, this idea of, is it top-down, sort of transformational change?
Not possible.
Is it bottom-up? Is it a mixture of the two? Tell us more
exactly.
about that.
I like to believe, and I am also really fond of bottom-up change, because that's most powerful. So when somebody can really find their individual why to be there, to be part of a team, to feel engaged, and to really act as part of that group, that's fantastic. But what I've seen so often in all the examples that I've been in, the different companies that I've been, is that it's when there's bottom-up change, when there's people with great energy and a great idea, and they get the opportunity to change, if there's no top-down involvement, if there's no confirmation top-down that yes, this is what we want, yes, this is in line with our narrative, it will not succeed. You will get people who are going to be frustrated in the end, might also leave the company, or maybe stay, make it even worse, and not be happy and create all kinds of
positive energy.
So I think yes, bottom-up change is great, and that's where we want to go. That's really what we want to fire up, that kind of energy, but it can only start top-down. If you don't have top-down involvement in the right way, then you will never succeed with any bottom-up change.
As a starting point.
Yes.
Yes.
What do you think about that? I mean, I maybe put it a bit firm like this. There might be other situations and experiences by other people in the room maybe, but I think this is the core.
I agree. And actually, a couple of years ago, we had the reality at Philips where we had all kinds of transformation programs that were really not being owned by our senior leadership. It seemed that there were two separate realities. We have our priorities, and then, we have our transformation initiatives, right? That's the program teams doing that. But obviously, it's not going to work, right? So we luckily, our leadership team realized that themselves, right? We need to own this to be successful. And now they are taking much more ownership for it. They are on a continuous learning journey themselves as well, in terms of, what's our role to make this successful? How are we going to approach this? And now we see, much more result coming out of that. So the bottom-up ideas are still very valid, and now it's supported by senior leadership.
There's a coming together somehow, isn't there? Rons, can you just give me some insight? When we spoke together to prepare this session, we talked about multiple changes, which you've already mentioned as your introductory point. Then you talked about heat maps. That fascinated me, so I'd like to understand. And then employee perspective heat maps, being key to success. Can you maybe? Yeah.
So as mentioned, we have quite a large transformation portfolio. So we have 15 large initiatives. And we created a change impact heat map to actually get a view of who is impacted by which change and in what way. And then if you lay that on top of each other, you can also see where are the bottlenecks. So we actually looked into all our different job families that we have across Philips, and we plotted that. And that showed that we have a couple of very highly impacted job families across Philips. In some cases, for instance, our product managers, they're impacted by 6 of these large transformation initiatives at the same time. So, and that shows us this is where we need to team up as initiatives, not just at a central global level where we need to align and make sure that we have one narrative, but actually also very practically. So we started to run focus groups with product managers to see what's your reality, what are the challenges that you are facing in your day-to-day way of working, and now when we add also these transformation initiatives on top of that, how can we sort of make that work? How can we bring it together? Outcome of that is now that we're now really working on integrated approaches. So also having an integrated storyline specifically for product managers. Have a specific impact analysis for product managers, one transformation journey, one learning journey integrated for this job family. And we're now actually running a couple of pilots across different job families that are highly impacted by these by multiple initiatives.
So we're back to this topic of integration. So Daniel says, I feel there's a calling back to you online. You talked also about the important role of sponsors and sponsorship. And I know that Kirsten mentioned this as well as part of OWN. It was clearly a story in terms of the involvement of the chief executive as well. So talk to us about this importance around sponsor and sponsorship, if I may.
Yeah, but I think the importance of sponsorship, like Lawrence also alluded to, I mean, it all depends on the complexity of the transformation that you're running and driving. Of course, the less complex, the less need of a sponsor, and sort of the more sort of bottom-up approach you can just make use of. But probably in the sense of the transformation projects we're talking about here, I mean, they are wider scope and probably group-wide. And yesterday I was part of a full-day workshop on a project that I'm part of, and we were trying to break down the different project deliverables into something very concrete and tangible for each of us to take ownership of. But of course, for many of these deliverables, there were a multiple stakeholder landscape that we need to get engaged and need to get involved in order for us to actually be able to deliver on the different deliverables. And some of these stakeholders whom I never met before, so the likelihood of them prioritizing, supporting my needs as a project member is not a guaranteed outcome, right? Because what's important for me is not necessarily important for them. I think Jacques also alluded to. I mean, there are many transformational projects already going on, and they have a busy workday already. So their change capacity is probably already at a high level. So quite often people impacted by a change would like to hear why a change is important from a leader at the sort of very top of the organization, so initially the sponsor of the project. And I think there's a lot of research and data actually showing that senior leaders are the preferred senders of messages about sort of the business reasons for a change, as well as the risk or cost of not changing. So for me, an effective sponsor legitimizes the need for change within the organization and sets the prioritization of change through direct engagement with impacted employees. So when we did the stakeholder mapping yesterday, I mean, we sort of initially said, well, here we need a sponsor to engage with this group of people because we as a project team won't get that buy-in that we need in order to reach the milestones or the timeline and so forth. So I think apart from them being, in most cases, the preferred centers of communication, I mean, of course, they're critical to meeting project objectives. They're critical to building sponsor correlation. They're critical, of course, low practical ensuring budget and removing roadblocks and so forth. But most importantly for me, they are the voice and the face of the sort of the employee transformation experience that we're trying to make an impact with.
Can I comment?
Please, yeah. We've got a reaction here. Lawrence, you first.
So I recognize that it's very important that you have a senior sponsor that explains the why to a broader audience, and that person does that over and over and over again. But we actually asked, in this case, in our case, the product managers, what would you prefer? Who would you like to hear the messaging from? And they said very clearly, we would like to hear it from our own direct manager, so from our people leader. Yes. And the reason for that is because it's great if your CEO says, yes, we need to do this, that's the way we need to go. But they are looking for, how can you make it real for me? What does this mean in my world, in my day-to-day work? How do I relate this priority over that priority? And the direct people leader of, in this case, a product manager, should be able to tell that story. And so that's actually why we're now also focusing on how can we best enable and empower those people leaders to also take ownership for that relevant transformation portfolio, which is, by the way, it's still very much in progress. It's not easy, but that's what we're trying to do now.
Yeah. Jacques, did you have the same view, or did you want to challenge differently?
Well, I think what is interesting here is that maybe then the direct manager is actually the sponsor that you're looking for. So, I mean, sometimes what we do in these kind of big changes is that we look too much at the roles. Like now we have the sponsor, and you need to take care of this group, and you need to be there and there and there, and then you're done. that's not being a sponsor. Actually, asks yourself. The demand from you as a sponsor is also to have sort of this role continuously, every day, everywhere you are. You need to see yourself and understand what is my situation here, who am I in a room with, how are they impacted, how do I talk to them, what is important for them, being able to put yourself in their shoes around you. And if that's the sponsor or the project leader or a change leader or an ambassador, that doesn't matter. But this is about the behavioral change for everybody involved in the company, everybody involved in a project. It needs to become part of who we are. It's not a role that we take for 5 minutes and then we take another role. And I think that's when it becomes focused on human.
That's when the magic happens.
And on emotions that are there. And I also believe what you said earlier, Maryna, is that we need to make it smaller. You cannot have a big learning once a day or once a week or 1 hour per day. It needs to become smaller, that it becomes part of your everyday, all-day experience. And I think that's also, if I understood right. But if you also look at change, then it should be, we should make it small. It should be possible for a change leader or for a sponsor to actually take that role easily, really quickly, at any moment of day. Making it small like that, making it part of your daily business, is what a change leader should focus on, I think.
Okay. I'd like to pick up the topic of making it small, because Laurence, you were saying that on average the leaders were impacted by 6 transformations within Philips. That's the statistics?
That was for this specific role, yeah.
Okay, and then earlier you're talking about the change fatigue.
Yeah.
So here I'd like to bring a point of how do you deal with change fatigue? And this is where, you know how well-being has become like a big thing in the HR world, yet we somehow keep those completely separate. So we have the well-being conference and change management conference and so on. Yet we don't talk about the well-being of that manager who has to deal with 6 transformations at the same time while running the daily things. And then we can say, yeah, we equip, we empower you, oh, you're gonna do great. But at the same time, do we actually sometimes step back and say, is this not too much for you? Shall we maybe map out that we'll do this transformation this year, in 2 years we'll do something else. Everything has to happen once. Actually, it should happen yesterday already. You know, so how come we don't pay enough attention to this change fatigue that you were mentioning? Because yeah, we're only human, as much as we'd like to automize and be robotic and rely on AI.
We have limitations.
We have limitations.
Absolutely.
And I think this is something that line managers, but also HR and learning and development and well-being, everybody, need to give more attention to. We're very focused on the KPIs, of course, because change is there to deliver business results, sure. But the people aspect of their well-being, can they cope? And we should not even expect them to cope. Maybe we need to give them more space to...
So we need to ask them those questions too and put things in place to support that process.
Yes, we do, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I agree. We're actually currently doing a research project on change fatigue and looking into what are the factors contributing to change fatigue. So I don't have the answers now, but that's an important point. So actually, the heat map that we created, we don't just use it to see, okay, where do we need to team up, where do we need to get to an integrated approach. We also use it actually in our leadership discussions. Well, how realistic is this, right? Do we need to reprioritize, or can we sequence things in a different way to make it easier to absorb? So yeah, it makes perfect sense what you're saying. But also there, right? We need to, I'm very curious for the experiences of other companies, but we are on a learning journey here. This is the first time that we're looking at this from such an integrated way. Before this, we didn't have a view how much impacts there were simultaneously.
Maryna, may I ask you a question, if I may, just to change topic a little bit and change tack? So there's something around employees being treated as partners. And that's one of your guiding principles. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, I think that that relates also to the first presentation that Kirsten had, where you let people come up with the plan, how that actually would work. So that's obviously you cannot do this without, and it's pushed, top down. There is no way people naturally will resist, because that would be their natural reaction. And you need people on your team that are reliable. And this is something, it's like a two-way process, and I think I can also relate that back to what Dennis was saying about top management, giving that message and so on. Something that people are looking for in the environment of uncertainty, they want a reliable someone to back them up. So that would be your line manager, or that would be your team. So when you carry out the top-down change project, you need your team to be there to help you. You cannot do this alone. Because otherwise you're like the Don Quixote fighting the windmill, and then you get people that burn out.
Yeah. So back, and let me link that then to this topic we've brought up about the well-being of people and their own resilience and looking after themselves. At a very practical level, what advice would you give around tools for employees who are fatigued by endless change? We know many corporations where just change is just the norm, right?
I think something that people could maybe do better is communicating very clearly when it's too much. Saying no. It sounds very simple, but we don't want somebody to think of us as lazy. We think we can take on the world. If we are in a very competitive environment, the pace is high. You don't want to be left behind. You have this FOMO, so you think, well, if I say no, how will my line manager appraise me later on? So being very clear about your boundaries when it's too much, that is the first thing that I would say you can do about communicating that you are human and you have your limits. That would be number one. Number two, I think your physical well-being. People underestimate the importance of that. It's very easy to put an app on that would tell you to get up, but very small things such as even standing or a balance board or fitness ball or things like this. I mean, I'm preaching now because I think since the lockdown I've myself become sort of a manager of my own body to make sure I don't fall apart, and not feel like a grandmother from sitting so much. So, but a lot of people don't know how to do those small things, and often, what HR team would do, they'll have yet another digital training about your well-being and mental health, instead of saying, well, maybe you cut down your video calls and just walk every time you have a one-on-one, have a phone call. Very simple things. Yeah. They can help.
Sort of self-management kind of tools within what you're saying as well, right?
Not everyone can self-manage. That's something also not to put too much responsibility on people. So sometimes as a line manager, you have to sometimes say those tips to people because they don't think about them.
Okay, look out for others. Okay. Let me go back to you, Dennis, in terms of measuring transformation. I know that when there's huge investment that goes into these massive change projects, right? They're not free. There's lots of things involved. How do you measure at Danske Bank, your success in the transformation process?
Yeah, I think there are many ways to measure, and it all depends on the project, of course. So there isn't, I would say, a one-size-fits-all approach. But the more tangible you can be in terms of your project deliverables, the better likelihood your changes are of measuring actual impact. But I think we often mistake change impact measurement as something we just need to measure during the actual change implementation. I think the real value of measuring change impact is doing it when the project has celebrated their implementation success and so on. So, for instance, 6 months after the official go-live date, when the project team has moved on to a new project, the sponsor has moved her attention elsewhere, and so forth. When we are back to normal, so to speak. So, I think one key point in terms of measuring success I would like to highlight is the importance of establishing early on, you could call it a benefit ownership model. So in order to ensure your project is being prioritized and have long-term sustainable impact, we are depending on the project's end users. I think we all agree to that. And it is our end users who we need to be at the center of our benefit ownership model, if you call it that. They're the ones who need to be accountable for whether a transformation is being embedded or not, and measuring whether, for instance, the proficiency level is increasing or not. And I think if you can convince your end users to take that sort of responsibility, then it's very likely that the project will fail shortly after the final go-live implementation milestone has been reached. So I think it's about being very clear about what behavioral changes are expected of your end users. Like Maryna said, make it very small, concrete, tangible. Make sure that your end users understand why this is important, whether this is coming from the sponsor or from the direct managers, and why it's value adding for them in their role. And then make them responsible and accountable for realizing the project ROI. So for me, how you measure, I mean, there are many ways, but the end users need to be responsible.
Thank you, Dennis. Laurence, may I just go back to you? We're coming into the last few minutes of our session before the coffee break. What's your piece of advice to anybody embarking on an employee transformation experience journey, just given, you know, what you've been through in your journey as part of Philips?
Well, I think it's important to start with the employee, right? And step in their shoes, see things from their perspective. So you need to engage with them throughout the journey. Otherwise, the risk is that you think of all these great things in your ivory tower, but it will not work in reality. And when we're not successful in our change efforts, it will only add to change fatigue, and we will have less confidence for whatever new change is coming up.
Jacques, on that same question, what advice would you give for any organisation, given you've been there and done it on the employee transformation experience?
Yeah, all the things we just talked about, I guess.
All the above?
All the above, yes. But I think you need to stay true and consistent. And if you are going into a certain direction in the company or with a change, you need to stay. You want to stay on your path and stay true to everything that you've said before. People need to be able to trust you and see that you mean it. That's also how you can make sure that people don't feel any fatigue of change, because they know that what you're doing is actually the right way to go. It's actually important. There's a reason why we do this. We're looking forward to where we're going towards, and that's only possible if you're consistent in your organization and if you're true to what you are saying. Your own behavior as a change leader, your behavior as a sponsor.
That you're role modelling to others as well,
yeah,
of course,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Jack. Dennis, maybe one of the last questions to you, and I'll probably ask the same of everyone around the table so we can get our voice in the room. What's your biggest learning been over the last years in terms of your change and transformation roles? Maybe a slightly more personal question. What's your own individual learning been?
Well, I mean, just being open and I mean, open-minded that sort of what you initially set out to achieve, sort of the great PowerPoint presentations and everything that you use to get your sponsor buy-in, that obviously that might not hold true a month or 6 months down the line. So being very open that the path will most likely change, and whatever you set out to achieve initially will look completely different at the end. So be open and be sort of agile in your mindset.
Thank you, Dennis. Maybe the same question to Laurence. What's your biggest learning been on the journey so far at Philips for yourself individually?
Change management is such a broad topic, and you can look at it from so many different perspectives, whether it's one individual change or a whole portfolio of changes. And I think the topic is really maturing, and I think we as professionals are maturing, and that's great to see. But I also believe we need to be much more ambitious to be successful and tackle change fatigue.
Thank you. Jack?
Yes,
biggest learning, and you're in a different role, of course, now, and you're in communication. So
yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, I think know who you have in front of you or around you. I think that's one thing that I often see happening, and that I've also made a step into myself sometimes, that you can make it too complex because we know too much. You know all the models. You know how important it is to take certain steps, or to really fully. I mean, if you use ADKAR, like we talked about at the first session, I mean, then you really want to do it good. And you want to take all the steps, and that's how you make it really big. So when then somebody's getting involved with your project, then, okay, now listen, now we're going to do all of this. And then you make it so complex as a change professional that people are disconnecting, and then it's not working anymore, and then it will become a lot of pushing and reminding and trying to get people back on board. So I think really understanding what is the environment around you, who are the people, what is their situation, and then deciding how can I apply just enough of tools to get them to join.
Make it happen.
And then also the tools will grow because they will get more interested maybe, or it will stay like that, and you will just gradually take steps forward. But don't take yourself too seriously, and know who's in your environment, and then use the minimum amount of tools and knowledge needed in order to get change starting.
Thank you, Jacques. And the same question to you. Maryna, what, I mean, given all your years of experience in this field, what is your biggest learning?
Well, I think patience is something that all of us could use when it comes to, Laurent said, be more ambitious. I'm thinking, how much more ambitious can we be? We don't need to be more ambitious. We need to be patient because, some changes can happen next year. That's okay. We can prioritize, and learning to prioritize is something that a lot of us could learn and have some more empathy for each other's limits.
Patience, prioritization, and empathy. They have P in all those words. I remember that one. Thank you.
It wasn't on purpose, by the way.
It wasn't on purpose.
Not a P.
Thank you. Michael, do we have a question from the online audience at all?
Yes, we do. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. We've got 4 questions.
We'll just go for one,
I'm going to go for one. It's particularly interesting. It's from Sura Al-Neha. Organizations reward outperformance. The problem at the moment is that outperformance is considered someone who can juggle lots of change without getting burned out. Culturally, we set this expectation, and it's not healthy. How do we shift this culture?
Maryna, would you like to try that one? That's a nice, easy question to finish on. How do we shift this culture of outperformance?
Outperformance. I've never heard of that expression.
Out or over, I would, yeah.
Yeah, because, statistics shows that people who get a burnout, usually the ones that are high achievers, you'll never have the lazy one burned out. Those have their things.
There are advantages of being lazy.
Oh,
I like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. If I could learn one thing from those people, and I'm jealous of those people who are very clear about their boundaries, like my evening time is my family time, weekend is my weekend, and so on. So this is really about setting your boundaries. And that's something that, of course, if you have a team that you're looking after, you need to try to prevent that, because you can spot those signs of being burned out or getting close. You can spot those signs. And I myself know better than anyone, because right now I'm burned out. So we try to prevent it, but sometimes it's too late. And then you see it's an accumulation of pushing yourself too hard, maybe culturally not seeing burnout as something that you can do or what people think of you. But actually, in my experience, when I went on sick leave with a burnout, I had a lot of people contacting me and saying, Maryna, good for you. You should have done this months ago. I've seen you struggle for months and carrying all the burden, but you've done this. And I was already too late in my case. But something that organizations should be more aware of is that fatigue and not pushing people too hard. We keep doing this. It's like this vicious circle. It's a well-oiled machine, and the well-being is on the back burner. And again, the well-being is not about the session on mental health and all these things. No, it's those small steps, and being also able to see when somebody's had too much and acting on it. Because very often people don't take you seriously till you actually
till you fall, exactly. Thank you, Maryna, for sharing that with us.
But
and I think
there's no time maybe anymore, but isn't it just a cultural problem? I think it's a leadership topic. You're not going to change it. So my advice would be find another company, move.
Thanks, Jacques. If you have that flexibility.
Sorry, no, exactly. Maybe that's too
Not everyone does.
No, but I think it is a cultural problem. It starts with management, and it's the top down line. And that's where so much of the basis can be found that you then need to change, and that's a big assignment for a company to do.
But that's possible, right? We can change.
It's possible for sure, but it's not.
So in Philips, we're saying we're not looking for heroes. right? Because the heroes are exactly the type of people that would take anything
May
on,
fall, yeah.
and some heroes might actually succeed in that. But change is not going away. We will continue to be in a world of change, right?
Yeah.
So we need to have a culture where we can deal with it, not by being heroes, but in the longer term.
But maybe by supporting and caring for each other. And you know what? I think it's coffee break. So let's care for the audience. Thank you very much. A very big thank you to all of my panelists today. Well done.
Thank you.